Welcome to the new and improved low-budget gaming. Well, new anyway. I'll leave you to judge the improved bit, but anyway, what do you think of the new digs? As simple as they were, those old floating columns of mine will still hold a special place for me, since they were, after all, the first 3D object I ever created. But when I decided to retool the show to make a season's worth of weekly episodes, I felt it was time to change the look of the show as well. So I spent about a year or so drawing up designs, fiddling around in Blender, and eventually I came up with what you're seeing now. Putting the overall package together, from the set to the new font to the title sequence and music, was hard work, but I have to say, I'm genuinely pleased with the result, and I hope you enjoy it just as much. Now then, with that bit of self-horn blowing out of the way, after spending a year or so away from the show, and since the 3 games I reviewed for the experimental episodes were average at best, I wanted to try and open Season 3 on a high note, and I think I found just the game to do that. Astrologaster, a narrative-based comedy-adventure game. Let us gaze upon the stars and determine just how good this game really is. And also, how far into the video I can make it without screwing up and calling the game Astrologer.
Astrologaster is based on the life of Simon Forman, an Elizabethan astrologer and physician. The game opens
long ago in England in 1592
with Forman suffering from the effects of the plague. He decides to consult the stars regarding his current situation because, I guess at this point, why the hell not? And through his reading determines that to cure himself of the plague, he needs to treat the symptoms. He concocts a special medicinal brew which does indeed cure him, and he in turn uses it to cure others, and from there decides to begin practicing medicine using guidance from the stars. Over the course of the next few years, which go by fairly quickly thanks to multiple nearly imperceptible time skips, numerous characters, each unique in their own way, will pay a call on Forman to have him read the stars not just to cure their medical ails, but also to provide guidance on certain life problems they may be dealing with. To do this, you're given up to 3 sets of star readings to choose from. It's interesting to see what the various star signs mean as far as what celestial house a planet resides in at a given moment and how it relates to a patient's current situation, but when you get down to it, it's basically just flavor text, since all you really have to do is pay attention to what the patient says and then look at the summary of each reading at the top of the screen to make your choice. I also have to dock major points for the lack of a manual save system. There's an autosave present which kicks in after every choice you make, but I always prefer to be able to go back to a specific point in a game whenever I want.
The cast of characters is what gives Astrologaster much of its enjoyability, thanks in no small part to the top-notch writing and acting. Each of them has their own quirk that sets them apart from one another. They've even got their own theme song to play every time they show up. Nicholas Mugg here is probably my favorite of the various patients. He's essentially the Shakespearean equivalent of the Facebook doctor. You know the kind I'm talking about. The type that gets all their medical knowledge from clickbait articles and people who heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy that may have read it somewhere at some point.
And I absolutely love the overall aesthetic of the game. Almost everything about it, writing and acting included, is geared towards making you believe you're in a theater watching an actual Shakespearean play, from the look of the backdrops to the very slight reverb added to the voices. I do think the pop-up book aspect sort of detracts from the theme, though. I don't hate it. On the contrary, I think it has its own charm in and of itself. It's just, when I think Shakespeare, I don't necessarily associate pop-up book with it.
And while we're on the subject of Shakespeare, why did we ever stop talking like this?
We began chundering and voiding from our...
You are bleeding from your fundament.
Be it true that he engages with another woman in acts of strumpy-humpy?
Mayhap a neighbour has cast a malignant spell upon your cabbages.
No joke, these are some of the most entertaining replacements for modern expressions that I've ever heard, and I may just have to start using them in everyday conversation from time to time. Anyway, enough discoursing out of my fundament. Back to the game.
The diagnoses and advice you give to your patients do matter, albeit only to a certain extent. In the most recent episode of QuickTime Event, one of the games I talked about was Pegasus 5 Gone Astray, another story-focused game which put great emphasis on the fact that the choices you made mattered. But the only problem was, apart from some slightly altered dialogue, they really didn't make that much difference at all.
Thankfully, the way the choices are handled is somewhat better here in Astrologaster.
The College of Physicians ain't too keen on form and practicing medicine without a license, to say nothing of using the stars to do it rather than the traditional method of sniffing a patient's piss. He can obtain a license from the University of Cambridge, but to do so he needs at least 8 letters of recommendation. To that end, the more accurate you are with your predictions, the happier you'll make your patients. Make them happy enough, and they'll give you a letter. Conversely, make them angry enough, and you'll lose points with them, but only if you haven't received a recommendation yet. After you've gotten it, it doesn't matter what you say to them. Now, unfortunately, Astrologaster does share some of the same problems I mentioned earlier with Pegasus 5, in that the overall story follows more or less the same path. In fact, there are numerous points where it literally does not matter what choice you make, and the game ends exactly the same way, whether you've gotten a license or not. However, in this game, various factors help to mitigate the seeming futility of the decision-making.
For one thing, your advice and prognoses will be remembered by your patients in their future visits, which helps to give your choices, at the very least, the illusion of having more weight to them, backed up again by the excellent performances from the entire cast, which bring gravitas, presence, personality to every single character, to the point that you genuinely want to make the right choices. Plus, Astrologaster lends itself well to replayability. There are some pretty funny moments to be had by making a quote-unquote wrong decision. And when you consider that an average playthrough can last anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, depending on how much thought you put into your choices, Astrologaster, despite its simplicity, is a brilliantly put-together game, sure to put a smile on your face. Now again, I hope you enjoy the revamp of low-budget gaming, and forgive any goofs or irregularities you might find in the first couple of episodes as I continue to sort of fine-tune the format. Hopefully we'll have it nailed down by the end of the season. And be sure and look in on next week's episode as well, which is sure to be interesting, to say the least, as we talk all about the rebirth of inexistence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must make haste to the toilet. A neighbor did place a malignant spell upon my cabbages, and I must purge it from my fundament.